Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first video lecture on data security and health information management. In this lecture, we'll discuss the fundamental concepts in privacy versus security. People throw these terms around interchangeably. They're two very different things. We'll define what data security means. We'll discuss the importance of data integrity and availability. And then we'll look at security breaches, threats, including those caused by people and the environment. Anyway, that's what we have for you. Let's get started. Okay, again, this lecture is covering data security. And I'll let you read the objectives on your own. And basically, what we're going to be looking at is privacy, security, and data security. Privacy is basically the right to be left alone. Data security and security, you can kind of think of data security as being security for data. It's keeping it safe from loss, from destruction, from alteration. So to do that, we need the means to control access and protect information from either accidental or intentional disclosure to either unauthorized people, unauthorized alteration, or something we often forget about, destruction or loss due to natural disasters, fires, hurricanes, what have you. So to do that, we need to keep data safe. And that means both when we're transmitting it electronically and when it's at rest. That means whether we're transmitting it over the internet and it's hopefully encrypted, or whether it's stored on a laptop or an endpoint device like a phone or a tablet. And again, we want to keep the data secure from alteration, destruction, or any other type of security issue. Data integrity. Integrity, we always think about in terms of truth and falsehoods, but in terms of data integrity, what it's talking about is data complete. Do we have everything we need? If it's a hospital record, do we have all the labs, all the diagnostic tests, the discharge summary, the op record, all those different things? Is it accurate? Is it consistent? Right? Are we reporting blood pressure that's taken the same way all the time? Is it timely? Do we have it when we need it? And is it reliable? Can we rely on it all the time? Paper records, that was a little bit of an issue. We talk data, speaking of paper records, needs to be available for patient care. Back in the old days, if we had paper charts and somebody called to a medical office and needed the information in the emergency room, it was very unlikely that you could get it right away, right? Now, with electronic health records, not so much of an issue, right? And to do that, we need a system that's available 24 hours a day. We also need backups, right? Systems fail, right? So we need some sort of way of backing up data. So if a server goes down, we have backup servers and we can go on without any loss of data. And one of the ways we can lose data is through security breaches. And these could either be hardware related or software related. More and more healthcare organizations are going to guest wireless networks. Why? Because people have malware sitting on their computer and don't know it. They're not going to be tapping in and potentially sharing that malware with the healthcare organization's internal network, right? We have hackers. People hack for all different types of reasons. Some of it is for secondary financial gain. And sometimes we have internal breaches, right? People are looking at records that they have no business looking at for a number of reasons. All of these are considered security breaches. We need to come up with data loss prevention strategies that control and limit what sensitive data is moved or transferred outside of the organization's information technology infrastructure. The majority of these threats are caused by people. We don't onboard and offboard people correctly. Sometimes we have contractors that we don't offboard and they still have access to systems with PHI, which is a problem, right? We have people that don't follow security protocols and leave doors open for people to come in and threaten the data security. But we also have environmental and hardware and software factors, right? We have people that don't apply the latest Windows security patches to their computers, don't run virus scan software, don't use dual authentication, don't use hardware firewalls, right? And then the environmental piece of it, we covered fires, floods, all these things are also security threats. People are the biggest threat in my view. And you can have threats from insiders who basically make unintentional errors. They leave their workstations logged on all the time. We have threats from insiders who abuse their access privileges. Maybe they're selling information to a medical malpractice lawyer, which has happened in the past. We have threats from insiders who access information, and sometimes it'll be former employees who we didn't turn off their access. So they do it for spite. Sometimes they'll do it for profit. We have people that want to steal a laptop. Sometimes those laptops have PHI on them and other threats. Some of the things that we get into are such things as phishing, spear phishing, and some of these other things, baiting, tailgating, pretexting, and then, of course, quid pro quo, right? In other words, this for that. Let's focus on the first four. Phishing is basically phishing, except you're fishing for information. And that's all I have for you. Come back for our next video lecture where we'll be talking more about data security. We'll see you then. Bye now.